Welcome back to the Champagne on Ice podcast presented by the Field of 68, as it is almost the holidays and Illinois basketball has had a quiet time here in the last week or so, but we got some things to hit on. We got a big game coming up on Friday in the Braggin Rights game, and we'll get to all of it here on this episode. Mike, how you doing? I'm Kyle Tausk, by the way, joined by Mike Farmer. How's it going, my friend?
Doing pretty well, Kyle. Thank you. Glad to be home for the holidays.
I know it's been a long semester, and now we
Yeah,
get a
it
nice
was.
break and holiday season and a little Illinois hoops mixed in there. Although, man, it's been quiet. We had,
It's been
eight
slow.
days off? Eight
Yeah.
days off. Now you got two games here in the next 2 weeks. So kind of a slow time, but we'll make do here. I got some questions I want to hit on here in this episode as we're kind of a third of the way through the season, 10 games out of 31 regular season games. So we'll get to that. But I do want to start with the game that Illinois played since we were last on the podcast. Only one game, even though it's been 10 days now once this is released since our last episode came out. And that was against the Colgate Raiders at State Farm Center, a team that has been to the NCAA tournament 3 of the last 4 years. They come in kind of a sleepy finals week holiday break spot, and Illinois, for the most part, takes care of them. Got off to a 14-0 start to the game, and then Colgate kind of made a run late in the second half, but Illinois never trailed in this one for the entire game. Win it 74-57. Obviously just a mid-major game, not one to take a ton from, but what'd you make of this performance from Illinois against a solid Colgate team? I mean, for a mid-major coming in, they're not one that you can sleepwalk and win, and Illinois took care of business.
Yeah, a lot of people were calling it a trap game heading into the game. I think we saw that a little bit in the second half. Obviously, you get out to a big lead at the start, big lead at halftime too. And then second half, it would kind of look lackadaisical. You're not really hitting shots, giving up some easy buckets. But in the end, sort of a tale of two halves. Even in the second half, they cut it to 10, I believe, with a couple minutes left. I never really thought the game was in doubt, in question. I mean, it was a 10-point lead with like 3 minutes left, maybe. I wasn't too concerned, to be honest. But the second half wasn't great. I think the first half was awesome. Pretty much everything we wanted to see happened. Like all around offensive effort. Terrence Shannon looked great. Some other guys getting buckets, stringing buckets together, stringing stops together. And then the second half, you have a big lead going into the half. Maybe you get a little lazy, get tired, worn out by finals week, whatever it was. In the end, you get the win. I'm not too concerned. I don't think there's too much to cover on this game, but still a good win.
Yeah, no, I was impressed with the way they started because uh, this was one, yeah, you mentioned some people considered it kind of a trap type spot for Illinois, and against a Colgate team that, I mean, they were beating Syracuse by like 24 earlier in the season. They've been to the tournament as like a 13, 14 seed the last 3 years. If you showed up and got off to that sleepy, slow start where you're rusty coming off 8 days off, all of a sudden you could have a really tight game. I mean, we saw it last year against a much worse opponent when in this similar spot it was Alabama A&M who came into Champaign. Illinois was losing that game with like 9 minutes left in that one. So we know that this is a spot, and we even look earlier in the week, like Marquette barely squeaked by some terrible team early in the week. Northwestern loses to Chicago State. Like this finals week, like really slow, not much going on week in college basketball. Like if you're not ready to play, all of a sudden you could be in danger of taking a really bad loss. But Illinois was never in danger of that because they got off to a 14-0 start and just controlled the game from the jump, which I thought was important because one of the biggest things that has been frustrating about this group the last 2 years, not as much this year. I think they've fixed it early in the season maybe, but last year especially the slow starts and just not being ready to play. And we haven't seen that here really the last couple of weeks. But in this game was one where if you got off to a slow start, you kind of saw that coming, but Illinois didn't, and they got off to a 14-0 lead. We're up by 17 at half, led by 22 in the second half. Took their foot off the gas a little bit, but Colgate never got within 9 the rest of the game. So it was 14-0. Colgate never got within 9 the rest of the time. Terrence Shannon was the catalyst in the first half, 14 points, had 5 blocks in this game. That one chase down block he had, oh boy, that was a hell of a play. And then in the second half, he didn't score, but you had Quincy Guerrier step up and score. And Coleman Hawkins had a nice day, 16 points, leading scorer for the first time all year. Coleman Hawkins leads the team in scoring. That's a good sign. And Marcus Damask had a slow first half, but then kind of when they were throwing two different guys at Terrence Shannon trying to get the ball out of his hands in the second half, and Damask stepped up and I believe had 11 second half points, and down the stretch really kind of put the game away with a three and a couple of post ups from the mid post. So overall, yeah, I think it was just a situation where you had to show up ready to play and just take care of a solid team at home in a spot where you could get lulled to sleep a little bit. And Illinois did that. And that's something you couldn't really say a lot of times, especially last season. So I'll take it.
Yeah, for sure. I think the addition of the veterans compared to last year's freshmen, it's night and day in terms of like slow starts, in terms of consistency overall. We've had a couple lulls like in certain games, like Tennessee go cold for a minute. I think that's bound to happen to any team. But overall, I mean, you've got pretty much five seniors, five fifth-year seniors in the starting lineup. You've got a couple off the bench too. This team's really talented, of course, but they're also very experienced. Brett Underwood, he knows what he has with this team. I think they have a goal in mind compared to, I mean, you look at last year's team and there's some guys that I think are more focused on individual stats, individual accolades, stuff like that, compared to this team where I think it really is a team effort night in and night out. We saw that on Sunday, great start, get sloppy in the second half, but overall the talent, the experience, veteran leadership, in the end, you still get the win over a pretty solid Colgate team who I think will most likely win the Patriot League, win their conference championship, and maybe be a challenge to some higher seed in March.
Yeah, it feels like they've done that every time they've gotten in. They've challenged. I think it was Arkansas a couple years ago, and then Wisconsin one year. Then they played pretty well. I don't think they've won a tournament game, but they've come close. But point being is that Illinois, it was a solid team that if you were asleep for the game, you weren't just going to like most of these teams in the 300s in Ken Pom and all the teams Illinois played, Western Illinois, Valpo, Eastern Illinois, like you could sleepwalk and win by 20. And then if you sleepwalk through this one, you might lose. So the fact that Illinois showed up, I mean, that speaks to, like you said, yeah, the veteran leadership on this team, just maturity level of these older guys. I think it is night and day. And that's why I think for the most part this year, Illinois has gotten off to pretty good starts. It feels like early in the season, I think we talked about it a little bit in a couple of those early bye games, but since then, like it feels like in the first 5-10 minutes of every game, Illinois has been ready to play. Like it hasn't been a situation where they've been asleep and these slow starts have gotten them probably since late November. This entire month of December, it feels like they've gotten off the pretty fast starts and shown up to play early, which was just such an issue last season in so many games throughout the season. I mean, we saw it against Arkansas in their final game in the tournament. They just didn't show up and the game was over 5 minutes in. So, I mean, yeah, I agree with that. I think and just the fact that I think one of my biggest takeaways from this game too is that you just have guys that can step up and get you a bucket and help Terrence Shannon out a little bit, because Terrence was great in the first half. All of a sudden, Colgate comes out in the second half, and you could tell it was a concerted effort by them. Somebody else is going to beat us here, and Guerrier did. Hawkins did, Damask did, Shannon didn't have to score, and you still held on to the lead and won by 17. And I feel like at times last year, like if Shannon or Meyer were off, you're in trouble. And now this year, I think you got veterans who can step up and carry some of that load. And to hit back on Coleman Hawkins' performance, 16 points, 6 of 14 shooting. I thought he had his best game of the season, and that was really important that's going to be really important, especially heading into a game like Friday, to get him going offensively. We had the whole discussion last podcast about, how polarizing he was and how a lot of people getting fed up about when is this guy going to show up to play on the offensive end. And I thought he did in this game, especially early on. He had a couple shots from three, and then you put him in a lot of pick and rolls, and he was rolling hard to the basket and just getting easy dump offs around the rim. Which is something that it's just not really been a part of his game, but it's something that he really needs to do. He needs to be more assertive and be more of an offensive option, especially in pick and roll actions, not just pop all the time and be shooting threes, but get around the rim, especially against mid-major matchups like this. So really encouraged by Coleman's performance. What do you see from him?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you just look at the box scores even. His past three games, Colgate, Tennessee, FAU. He's back from injury. He's playing slightly better on offense for sure. These last three games have been his highest three games in terms of scoring output. He's putting up more shots. He's putting up a lot of threes as well. Still not super efficient from three. I think the last three games he's been right around like 30%, slightly less than 30%, 6 for 21. I think that's like 28, whatever it is. But definitely encouraging. He's gotten to the hoop a little bit, like you've been saying. Defense is still there. I think uh, it looked a little shaky, his defensive effort against Tennessee, but I think you can attribute that to a couple things. But I thought he was pretty solid for the most part against Colgate. Looked a little sloppy in the second half versus Colgate on defense. I think the whole team did though, as I've been saying.
Yes.
But I think he's improved a lot. He's stringing a couple decent to solid performances together. I don't think he's still the Coleman Hawkins of past, which honestly, like you look back and Coleman's not a guy that's been averaging 15 points a game or anything. I know his role has like slightly increased year to year. He was right around 10 points per game last season. Uh, I think that's probably where he's going to end up this season. I don't think he's going to have these. He'll have breakout games where, like I think you said last podcast, he'll hit 5 or 6 threes or something. He'll go crazy, and we'll be like, "Where's this Coleman Hawkins been all season or his whole career?" He'll probably have a game like that coming up pretty soon, which would be awesome to see. But overall, I don't think he's not going to be a crazy scorer that puts up 15 points a game. He's not going to be hitting 3 threes a game. I think what you look for in Coleman Hawkins is, of course, a steady presence on defense. And as like a 6'11 super versatile guy that Brad Underwood loves to put in different spots, you just look for some form of consistency game to game, helping to run the offense, slightly improve shooting. We've been saying it's been 4 years. We're pretty sold on Coleman Hawkins not being a great 3-point shooter, but he can still get you a couple a game. I don't think I think some Illini fans are like they see the second round mock draft like from last season. They see like 4-star coming out of high school, projected to be a second round pick, and they expect him to play like Kofi or Io. They expect 17 points a game and 10 rebounds. That's just not who he totally is. That's not going to be his role on the team. Terrence Shannon's the number one guy. I think Marcus Damask is solidifying himself as the second option on offense. Coleman has had increased shots per game the last couple games because he's getting back in a rhythm a little bit. But I still don't think he's going to be the second option all season. I think he's finding his role in that third, maybe fourth option. Quincy Guerrier is breaking out a little bit in terms of his shooting and his scoring output. So I think Coleman just needs to find his role, which he has been doing a little bit, and just stick in that role, stay consistent, don't foul out of these games. He's had a little bit of foul trouble the past couple games, but overall, just consistent game to game, no crazy boneheaded turnovers, no mouthing off to the refs, which he'll probably still do no matter what Brad Underwood says. But
Yeah.
just not be a head case. I don't know. Some fans, like we talked about last week, they've been fed up with him for weeks. They've been fed up with him for years, maybe. But overall, he's a super valuable piece to this team. He's a guy that has been stepping up a little bit. I think he'll continue to step up. That injury could still be hurting him a little bit. We're not really insiders. We don't totally know if that injury is still hurting him. We're just going off of what Brad Underwood says week to week in his press conferences. But yeah, I'm encouraged for sure. I think he's slowly getting back to that form he had last year, the form we saw a little bit in his sophomore year too. That like after his sophomore year, these analysts, these insiders started to project him as a breakout guy, as a second round pick, and I think he's slowly getting back to that.
Yeah, no, I agree with almost everything you said there. And I like what you said too about how I think the thing with him is there's always been such high expectations because it feels like every offseason the narrative has kind of been like, all right, he's going to be your second best player. He's going to be a star
Yeah,
player, an NBA player. And I mean, he still has an opportunity to be an NBA player. I think he's hurt himself a little bit early in the season on that front. But I feel like people expect him to be an all conference star caliber guy for this team. And that's just never really been what he is. And I think people need to start realizing that he can be a really, really important piece without averaging 15 points a game and without being a first round NBA draft pick, without being an all Big Ten second team player. That doesn't mean he's not. I mean, maybe it was fair to have those expectations coming off his sophomore year, and yeah, sure, he's a guy that could have probably left for the draft this year. So you hear that and you're like, oh, this is a guy that was going to be an NBA draft pick. Well, he better be averaging 17 and 10, and he should be a star player in college basketball for us. That's just not really what Coleman is, but he's still really, really important to this team. And I got a question I want to get to in a little bit where I'm going to touch on a little further. But the other thing with him is like you see the drop off when he's not on the court. It's drastic.
Exactly.
More than any other player on this roster. When he's not on the court, you can feel it more than anyone else. And that's just because of how much he does for this team. But hey, if he can give you 16, like in this game, once every 2 games, and he can prove to be at least a little bit more of an offensive threat. Like you mentioned it too about 3-point shooting. Yeah, he's not a great 3-point shooter. That's been the case for his whole career. His career high is 29%. He's still got to be, when he gets shots in rhythm, when he pops off pick and pops with Terrence Shannon with the ball or with Ty Rodgers with the ball. I want him taking those shots because if he can open up the floor and be a respected offensive threat for opponents, that's huge for Illinois. And if he can prove that he can give you 16 points in a game like this and come out firing early in the game, I think he had 8 points in the first 5 minutes. Well, that's huge because that allows Illinois to get off to a great start. That Colgate's big man has to respect him on all levels of the court. Illinois is much better. And then obviously his defensive impact has been the case all season long. So I just think people need to realize he's really important to this team. He's also not a superstar caliber NBA first round draft pick. That's just not what he is at this point. But I was encouraged by that performance by him in terms of being Illinois' leading scorer because, hey, you're going to need that a couple times. Not every time. He's not going to average 15. But every once in a while, step up and lead the team in scoring, and he can. So that was nice to see. I want to get to I got 5 questions here that I want to hit on. We're a third of the way through the season now, 10 games out of 31, so about a third. There's 31 regular season games. And I just want to hit on some big picture questions here. We're about to reach conference play. Got one more non-conference game. We'll get to that a little bit later on. Braggin Rights Preview that one Friday night, 8 o'clock. But first, I want to just talk a little bit big picture about this team. I got 5 questions I want each of us to just give a quick answer to. We'll move on to the next one and just kind of assess where this team is at through 10 games of the season. Number 1, biggest reason for optimism about this Illinois basketball team through 10 games is what?
For me, I would say because of the experience, because of I think increased talent level from last year, I would say it's the ability to stick with teams, like especially good teams like Tennessee, Marquette, FAU, to stick with these teams when things aren't going right. And I think it's also due to a shift in culture from last year. Ty Rodgers mentioned we've got the bad guys out of the locker room this season. Whatever he said was pretty funny. But you look at the game like Marquette, shots aren't falling late. You look at Tennessee, shots aren't falling in that stretch in the second half. And we don't let it get out of control to a point where we're down 20 and fans are convinced the season's over. I think the Tennessee game, we fouled a bunch of players late. We got the score closer to what it probably should have been. But overall, you look at these 3 big games, Marquette, Tennessee, FAU, you win one of them, you go to a tough environment in Knoxville, Tennessee, and you manage to stick with them. In the Tennessee and Marquette games, you have a lead at some point in the second half, which you're playing 2 top 10 teams. That's awesome to see for an Illinois team that was projected 25th to start the season. I would say I'm optimistic because they're not letting these games get out of control. They're sticking with the program. They're sticking with the plan, even though they did chuck a lot of threes versus Tennessee. But overall, I'm pretty convinced this team's really a contender for the Big Ten and a threat in March.
Yeah, I like that answer a lot. I'll go a little bit different angle and say biggest reason for optimism, Illinois has Terrence Shannon, other teams don't. You got a bona fide All-American player on your team. And I truly believe I've grown higher on what this team can be since the preseason because I've seen the level that he's playing at right now. I mean, you got a first team All-American. You've got a guy who's is he going to challenge Zach Edey for any of these awards? It's probably not, because it's just impossible to overtake a guy who's averaging like 25 and 13 on the number one team. But I mean, he's in the top 3 to 5 players in the country right now. A guy averaging 21 a game, shooting 42% from three. We know he's probably the most unstoppable player in transition in the country. When he gets to his left hand getting downhill, I mean, guys make a concerted effort to get out of the way or foul him because you can't stop him. And when you got a go-to guy like that, I mean, we remember the two most successful teams here in recent memory for Illinois, you had All-Americans on them. You had Ayo Dosunmu on the 2020-2021 team, and you saw the impact that just having a guard who can go get you a bucket and lead you had. And then on the Big Ten title co-share team a couple years ago, you had Kofi Coburn, who was a first-team All-American and was a guy that was going to give you 21 points every night and 10 rebounds, and was just a go-to. You know what you're getting. That guy is going to be at the top of opposing team scouting reports. That's not going to matter because he's still going to produce. And Illinois has another one of those guys in Terrence Shannon. And if you can just rely on a guy, I mean, you look at a lot of these teams in the past that have won in March, like they've had a go-to scorer that they can ride, that if he's hot in the NCAA tournament, you're going to go pretty far because teams aren't going to be able to stop him. And especially in this weak Big Ten, like Terrence Shannon's probably going to win Illinois a lot of games by himself, just by going and getting 28 points and being the best player on the court in every game except against Purdue. I can say that pretty confidently. In conference play, and you can throw in the final 2 non-conference games because it's true then, Illinois is going to have the best player on the court in every game except against Purdue in those two. So that's my biggest reason for optimism is you got a stud in TSJ. Biggest cause for concern still about this Illinois team after 10 games is what?
I think just because of the Tennessee game mostly, I think this team still has like their Achilles heel is they get frustrated, maybe shots aren't falling, refs aren't calling fouls, whatever it is, and they resort to what they did last year, which is chuck up a bunch of threes, 30 feet from the hoop, late shot clock, don't really run an offense. I think that's because they still don't have a true point guard, which I'm not totally concerned about compared to how I was concerned at the start of the season. But it's just like you look at the stats, the cumulative stats this year compared to last year. I know it's only been 10 games, smaller sample size, but they're still shooting like last year it was like they made 7.5 threes a game on 31% on like 25 attempts or something. And this year it's slightly improved. It's like 8.5 makes on 24 shots or something. But it's like really similar. We're still shooting like 32%. There's barely any overall team improvement in terms of 3-point shooting. And I think we're vulnerable to teams that can shut down Terrence Shannon Jr. like Tennessee did a little bit. They shut down Damask's like low post game. And then we're limited on offense a little bit, even though we have some great scorers and Coleman's pretty solid. Quincy's really solid. Luke Goody's a great 3-point shooter. But I think we get stopped in certain areas of offense, and we resort to what's easier, which is just chucking threes.
Yeah, I agree with that. I still am going to say though, biggest cause for concern is not having a point guard. I still think that's it. I agree with you. I'm less concerned about it than I was when we were talking about it preseason, because I think Illinois has proven that they can be effective without it and that they can neutralize that problem a little bit. But still, like you look at the Tennessee game too, like, yeah, Terrence Shannon, they had a matchup for him, which most teams don't, but Tennessee had a matchup for Shannon, slowed him down, didn't allow him to get going to his left hand. Marcus Damask, they had physical wings that could just overmatch him a little bit, and he wasn't comfortable, and he didn't get those mid-post matchups that he got against FAU. Well, then those two guys are shut down, and yeah, Illinois gets 3 happy, and offense stagnates, and they're not really doing much because they don't have that true point guard that can break down a defense and create offense and create buckets for other guys. And you having a guy like that next to Shannon when he does get shut down a little bit or he has an off night, like that would be really important. Illinois just doesn't really have that. And I still think that there's going to be certain games. I think most games, especially talking about how weak the Big Ten is this year, like I don't think it's going to pop up much, but there's just going to be every once in a while those certain games where maybe Shannon's having a rough night or something else is going on, or Illinois' offense is really struggling, and you kind of see it, and it's like, oh man, it'd be really nice to have a guy that could we could put it in his hands, and maybe he's not Terrence Shannon in terms of the scoring ability, but he's a guy that can create and that can play make and that can just kind of create offense and get to the paint and break a defense down. And the other thing too is I think we've seen at times Illinois is prone to being pressed in the backcourt and being pressured in the backcourt, and not having a point guard could cause some turnover issues at times. And I mean, we saw in the Tennessee game, they had Marcus Demas bringing it up, and he got his pocket picked a couple times for fast break layups because you don't have a point guard. And saw against Rutgers, Ty Rodgers struggle against the press. So I'm not overall, when I talk about this, like you said, I'm not saying that this is going to limit Illinois' ceiling, or is that I don't think it's as big a concern as I thought earlier, but I still think if I had to pick the biggest concern, I think that is still going to continue to pop up in certain games this year.
You guys know by now, we've partnered with BetMGM Sportsbook for this college basketball season. We're going to be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks and predictions throughout the college basketball season. And we are going to have special offers for you, the listeners and the viewers on the Field of 68 each and every week during the season. If you haven't signed up with BetMGM yet, use the bonus code FIELD1500 and you will get up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager on BetMGM Sportsbook. Here's what you got to do. Download the BetMGM app. Sign up using the bonus code FIELD1500. Deposit at least $10 and place your first wager on any game. You will receive up to $1,500 in bonus bets if that bet loses. Just make sure you use the bonus code FIELD1500 when you sign up. And remember, BetMGM is now available under one wallet in select states. As a New Jersey resident, this is super convenient for me when I have to go cover games in New York or Philly. When crossing state borders, just log into your existing account instead of having to create new accounts in each state that you go to. And most importantly, I got to let you know, we do have some fun stuff coming up for this college basketball season. Bet insurance tokens, college hoops odds boosts, my personal favorite, parlay odds boosts. So download the BetMGM app today.
Number 3, the player who needs to step up as we head into Big Ten play the most is who?
I mean, I already went on a tirade about Coleman Hawkins, but I still think it's true. He's so crucial to this team. I think, like I've been saying, the defense, it's still there for the most part. Maybe a little bit increased effort on rebounding would help the team for sure. There's no doubt about that. But just offensively, I think he still needs to step up in terms of facilitating the offense, because like you've been saying, Ty Rodgers still hasn't proven to be that true point guard that can really run an offense. I think the answer is Coleman Hawkins. Like, you've seen at times in the past 2 years when he's getting extended minutes and when he's playing really well, that the ceiling of this team is really high. I know it's obviously different players, different systems, but still you've seen how this guy is able to elevate teams on offense and defense, in transition, just in every aspect of the game. He needs to be a better leader, I think. I think he will as the season progresses. Like, this is probably his last year in Champaign. I don't think he's going to be a super selfish player or anything. I think he'll realize his role, and I think he'll step up for sure.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I'm going to go a different direction here just for the sake of having a different answer, and I'm going to say Dane Danger behind him, because he hasn't been very good at all. And I think I think he needs to step up to give Illinois some front court depth behind Coleman, because we know that I agree, Coleman needs to step up and he needs to be big time for this team. He's probably their most important player, but he's going to get in foul trouble at times, and there's going to be times where he can't be on the court for 35 minutes. And Illinois at this point just doesn't have the depth behind him with Danger, and even you could throw Hansberry in there as well, even though he's a freshman, hasn't played a ton. But it's just the most stark contrast on this team in terms of on the court versus off the court is when Coleman Hawkins is off and Dane Danger is on. I don't think Danger's been horrible by any means, but there's been such a difference there that he needs to step up and be a capable guy to come in and give you 15 minutes at the 5 spot behind Coleman when he gets 2 early fouls, when he's battling Zach Edey one-on-one in a couple weeks at Mackey Arena, and Coleman gets called for 2 fouls. Well, Dane Danger needs to come in and prove that he can keep Illinois afloat at the 5, and there's going to be other games where that happens. And it feels like right now, I think Danger played okay against Colgate and has played a little bit better here recently, but defensively, there's such a drop off there. Like Dane Danger's getting abused on the defensive end right now. And I think he needs to step up in that capacity. And then we've seen at times last year, like there's been games where he can be an offensive force in the post and he can get you 20. And we haven't really seen that flash this year. And a lot of that's been because he hasn't played a ton. But if he can give you the occasional like big time offensive performance off the bench against a matchup that is favorable, and he can just give you some depth behind Coleman, I think he needs to step up, because right now I feel like he is the one guy who I can kind of pinpoint and say, man, he's not really helping you that much. And I think he can, because he showed he can last year. So I'd love to see him step up. Go ahead.
That would have been my answer, but I honestly think it's been 10 games, but I think that ship has kind of sailed. Like his role on this team is when Coleman's tired, when maybe Quincy's tired, he's coming in with like 13 minutes left and getting you to the under 12 timeout. And like, if he makes a single mistake, he's getting pulled out of the game. So it's still early in the season. Things could change. His role could develop a little bit more. But I kind of think Brad and the coaching staff have given up on him, because even the flashes he's shown this year have been like against teams ranked in the 300s on KenPom. He hasn't done much. Like he came in versus Marquette, made a couple mistakes, came in versus Tennessee, made a couple mistakes. There's a chance versus like lower tier Big Ten teams without a really physical big man, like Minnesota, maybe Penn State. I don't know. But I think that ship has kind of sailed. And I think Coleman and Quincy are going to be the ones anchoring this front court like they have already.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's totally fair. I just think there's going to be a time where you're going to need him, whether it's Coleman's just having a disaster of a night where it's just one of those nights where he has 6 turnovers and Brad's like, I got to get someone new in here. Or there's going to be times where Coleman's in foul trouble. He's battled those issues the last couple of years. There's just games where you have to go to him because Coleman has 2 early fouls, or he's got 4 fouls midway through the second half. Like that's going to happen at some point. So I just feel like, just for the sake of argument, I feel like it'd be really nice if he stepped up and gave you a capable backup 5-man behind Coleman. Number 4, and this is kind of along the same line, so you could give the same answer because I think you might, but biggest X factor for Illinois heading into Big Ten play, and we'll say aside from Terrence Shannon because he's your star and you know that obviously he's your most important guy, but biggest X factor aside from him.
I'm going to give a bit of a weird answer and not really lock in on one person, but I'm going to say whoever the consistent second leading scorer is night to night. We've seen Damask goes off for 33 versus FAU. Quincy drops 20 plus versus Tennessee. Damask also goes off versus Marquette. Coleman goes for 16 versus Colgate. I think Terrence Shannon, there's going to be, like you said, a handful of nights where he's maybe dropping less than 15. He's not really getting to the basket. He's not making free throws, whatever it is. You're going to need somebody to step up on those nights, which is going to be crucial for sure. But I think overall he's getting you 20 plus per game, and that leads to needing a second leading scorer, obviously. I think Damask in that 12-point per game range now, he's doing really well. But like you saw versus a physical Tennessee team, he really got limited, and that Illinois needed Quincy Guerrier to step up. Pretty solid overall effort versus Rutgers, versus Colgate. There's been like group scoring. But I think it's really crucial to have a second guy night to night that's going to be in double digits at least. And I think if there's one guy that's doing that consistently, this team looks even better instead of having to rely on a different guy every night, like Guerrier, Damask, Hawkins. I think if one of those, maybe 1 or 2 of those guys step up pretty much every night and get you 10 to 12 a game, I think this team's looking really good for conference play.
Yep, I agree with that 100%, and I'll just give a specific name because I think it's the guy that needs to do it, and that is Marcus Damask, because no one else on this team is capable of putting up 33 against Florida Atlantic at Madison Square Garden. So you know that that's in him. I think 15 a game is in him then. You know, you're not asking him to go nuts, but if he can just show up on a night-to-night basis and be that number 2 next to Terrence Shannon, he's going to get a lot of favorable matchups in the Big Ten, especially if guys are putting their best wing defender on Terrence. You might have a smaller guy on Marcus. You can get him those post-up opportunities, and he can eat in that area. I think there's still another level he can hit in terms of three-point shooting. I don't know what his number currently is, but I think it's sub 30% from three still for Damask.
It's low 20s.
Low 20s right now. That's not who he is. He's a career 36% three-point shooter, I think, maybe even higher than that. So I think he can make more shots than he has so far, and he's still been good. But, I mean, you see him step up in the second half against Colgate and give you some really key buckets down the stretch to make sure that Colgate stays at arm's length there. And you saw, obviously, against Rutgers on the road, he played well. But against Tennessee, like Terrence was getting shut down, and you didn't have him, and you didn't have that second guy that could come in and lead you and give you a 20. And that was just because it was a tough matchup for him. But I just want to see consistency, because I think when you just kind of assess who he is as a player, he's kind of a guy that you would pinpoint and say, well, yeah, that guy should be giving you just a consistent 12 to 15 points every night, because he's a guy that doesn't really get sped up. He's a guy that it can score a variety of different ways. He's so experienced. And I think that's really important for Illinois is, we can't have Marcus give us 3 on 1 for 9 shooting once every couple weeks. Like, he's got to show up consistently as the number 2 scoring option on this team. And you can mix in Coleman can do that one night and Quincy can do that one night, but Damask has to be the pinnacle of consistency for this Illinois team and bring it every single night and give you shot making and give you a second guy you can give the ball to and can create one-on-one as well, because I think he'll have a lot of favorable matchups. So, I agree. I echo everything you said, but I'll be more specific and say I think Damask is that guy that you're referencing there. I think he should be that guy. Final question, and this is one that is just pretty simple. Illinois finishes the regular season with how many wins? Have you changed your opinion? I went back and looked. I believe I had 22 and you had 23 in our preseason prediction in the regular season. They sit at 8-2 right now. Has that number changed at all after these 10 games? How many wins does this team finish with in the regular season?
Honestly, I can't totally remember what I said in terms of Big Ten wins before the season in my predictions. But I think we close out. I think we beat Mizzou. I think we beat FDU, obviously. So that's puts us at 10-2 with one Big Ten win already. I think we get 15, probably 15 Big Ten wins. That puts you with 24, 25 wins, somewhere in that range. I think because the Big Ten is slightly down this year, I think we're less prone to going to play some random Big Ten team on the road at 8 p.m. on a Tuesday night and losing by 20 like we've seen in past years. I think, like I mentioned this earlier in this podcast, like the experience, the veteran leadership, it's there. We're getting off to hot starts. We're not letting teams pull away from us late in the game too much. I think that's really going to help in terms of the Big Ten schedule. So I'm saying 24, 25 wins, honestly. It puts you probably on 2 or 3 seed line in terms of March, and probably second in the Big Ten behind Purdue.
Yeah, I think I'm with you. I think I've increased my win total a couple since I've seen this team play so far, and also since I've seen how bad this conference is. That's exactly the other thing. Yeah. I think I predicted 13-7 in the Big Ten in our preseason, and I think Illinois will be better than that. I think they get 14 or 15 minimum. I'll go 15. I'll go with you there. 15 Big Ten wins. I think they take care of Missouri on Friday, which we'll get to in a moment. And that puts them at 24-7 for the regular season. And I think that's on the table for this team, because I just think I agree. I think last year there was just, you never knew what you were getting from this team. It's every game you went into, maybe with the exception of a Minnesota and a Nebraska, like you went into these games and you just weren't sure, like, is this team going to show up? Is this team going to just put up a dud and lose to Penn State by, in the game that they did, and lose to Ohio State on the road in that late February game? A bad Ohio State team runs you out of the gym. Like, I don't think you're going to get that with this team. I think this team is going to take care of business against the teams they're significantly better than pretty much the entire conference slate. Maybe there's one game where they get upset, but I think that'll get balanced with one game they win that you maybe don't expect, whether that's against Purdue or at Wisconsin or something like that. And yeah, I just think this conference is soft, and Illinois is the second best team in this conference. I'm confident in saying that as we sit here today. They're the second best team in the Big Ten, and they're significantly better than about half of this conference at least. And I think they'll take care of those teams. And so I think they get to 15, 24 wins. As I'm upping my preseason prediction by 2 right now. So yeah, I think we're on the same page there. Let's get to this game Friday night to close it out here on this episode. Final marquee non-conference game, if you want to call it that. Missouri hasn't been great so far, but I still call it a marquee game because this is a rivalry game. This is kind of a throw out the records game every year. And this is a game that Illinois has not fared well in under Brad Underwood. He is 2-4 against the Missouri Tigers as Illinois' head coach. And for a majority of those games, he has had the better team and hasn't really shown on the floor. Last season, you probably couldn't say that. I think Missouri was a better team, but they weren't 30 points better. They just destroyed this Illinois team in this game last year. I forget what the final was, but it was a rare game where I could not watch till the end because it was just unbearable to watch. Illinois was getting run out of the gym at halftime by 30-something. Uncompetitive performance. Ayo Dosunmu went 0-3 against Missouri in his 3 years at Illinois. Like, they've won 1 of the last 5 against this team. So Missouri comes into this game and they haven't been all that impressive, but you better show up to play. This is a rivalry game. This is a game that Missouri gets up for. And I still consider it, even though it's only a quad 2 game on a neutral site for Illinois, I still consider this a marquee game for Illinois to close out the non-conference. Missouri comes into this game 7-4. They're ranked 85th on KenPom that I'm looking at right now. They lost to Memphis by 15 at home, lost to Jackson State at home, did lose on the road in a semi-competitive game against Kansas, and then on Sunday lost to Seton Hall. They did beat Pittsburgh on the road, and they squeaked out a game at Minnesota in which they came back from down, I think, 22 in that game. So body of work has not been all that impressive for this team, but this is still a big game for Illinois. What do you see in this matchup? What are you expecting on Friday night?
I mean, you don't even really have to look at Missouri's roster. I mean, you can. It's clear they're less talented, but like you've been saying, that's been the case 4 or 5 of the last 6 matchups we've had with Missouri. Pretty much the whole Brad Underwood tenure. It really doesn't matter what the records are. It doesn't matter the talent level of the teams, because this is one of those rivalry games where records get thrown out, buzzer beaters happen, crazy upsets happen. Like a couple years back with the really good 2020-21 team, Iowa went for like 35, 37, something crazy, and Illinois still manages to lose. And then you come back the next year, you get a massive win. Come back this past year, Illinois is playing like well at the point of that game. Like, they beat UCLA, they beat Texas, slipped up versus Penn State, I think. But then you just come out and you get blown out by 22, 25 or something. You're down like 35 in the second half. It's crazy. It's not really predictable, but I do think both teams have a good amount of transfers. Like, both teams are pretty experienced. Missouri returns a couple guys like Nick Honor, Noah Carter, I think. Their leading scorer is Sean East. He's been pretty efficient this year. He's actually a really good player. But like you said earlier, Illinois has the best player in this game. Illinois will have the best player in every single game they play pretty much the rest of the year. I don't think there's really any excuses to come out flat this game. I don't think we lose this game. Solid quad 2 win. I think we beat this solid Missouri team. But you just never know. I don't think we're going to come out flat or anything. But, down the stretch, Illinois still has to rely on what they do best, which is getting to the hoop, not chucking up threes. We'll see. I mean, you really just don't know. I don't really have a prediction for this game, but I do think Illinois does come out and win this game in the end.
Yeah, I agree. We can get to our official predictions in a minute here, but I do want to talk about it a little further. It's a game where if all else was taken out and this was just your average non-conference game, Illinois randomly schedules Missouri for a neutral site non-conference game, I come into this game being pretty confident Illinois should take care of this team. I don't think this is a very good Missouri team. They lose Kobe Brown from last year, who dominated Illinois in that game. I forget how many he had, but he just dominated. He's in the NBA now. And they lose their point guard in Demoy Hodge from last year, or one of their best guards. He ran point some. So this is a team that has struggled so far. It really hasn't been good at all on the defensive end against a pretty terrible Seton Hall team, or one that had been pretty terrible for most of the year. They gave up 93 on Sunday to Seton Hall, and it's a team that it's not impressive team at all to me. And I think this is one that Illinois is significantly better pretty much across the floor. I know Missouri, like you mentioned, I think Sean East's a good player. I think Nick Honor's a solid point guard. They bring in 7'5" Connor Vanover from Oral Roberts, and he comes off their bench and is just kind of a freak of nature, but he hasn't really been all that effective. So it's not all 7'4" guys are Zach Edey, I guess. But yeah, I think Illinois is way better, and they need to prove it, and they need to have that chip on their shoulder. I mean, you got guys back from last year, Terrence Shannon, Coleman Hawkins, Ty Rogers, Luke Goody. Like, those guys experienced just getting the doors blown off them against this Missouri team from the opening tip. They were down 35 points in that game against a Missouri team that was good, but they were a 7 seed in the tournament, and it's not a team you lose by 30 to, even with the issues that Illinois had last year. That was one of the more embarrassing losses Illinois had in the Brad Underwood era. I can say that pretty confidently. And Missouri's delivered probably a couple of the most embarrassing, because that Illinois team in 2021 or 2020 with Io and Kofi, that was just way better, loses that game. Like, this Missouri team has delivered some really embarrassing losses to you, and you need to take that personal in this game. And we talk about how much this team has gotten off to faster starts, and there's not as much of an issue of, hey, is this team even going to show up for this one? Like, yeah, this is one where let's show that. Come out, get off to a quick start, control this game. Don't let Missouri even in this one, because I think you are a team that should control it. And I think it'll still be a relatively competitive game, because it's just what the Braggin Rights is, other than last year pretty much. But Illinois' got matchup advantages here. Missouri's a team that is a three-point shooting barrage. I mean, under Dennis Gates the last 2 years, they take a ton of threes. Illinois defensively runs teams off the three-point line, forces you into tough twos. Missouri will not have success if Illinois can execute on the defensive end. They're going to want to take shots, and Illinois is not going to let them. And it could be a tough offensive night for them. But yeah, Terrence Shannon show up, be a physical monster in this one. Missouri doesn't really have a wing that can match you on their roster. They got a couple guys they'll throw at them, but they've got some smaller guards, and Terrence Shannon should overwhelm this Missouri team. And I think you'll get some matchups, especially if you can get like 5'10" Nick Honor switched on to Marcus Damask, like eat that up in the mid post and go to work on that. Or Sean East, a lot smaller. You get those matchups. Illinois, I think, can exploit them. Missouri, really bad rebounding team so far this year. They have a 7'5" center coming off their bench, but he doesn't rebound the ball. And they don't really rebound the ball as a team. Illinois should own the glass and should just physically impose themselves. And there's really no excuse if you let this Missouri team find a way to beat you, because you're much better than them. And coming off last year, I want to see this team come out with some revenge on their mind, because you have enough carryover. I know you got new guys with Guerrier and Damask and Harmon and the freshmen, but you got enough carryover from last year that should be fresh in your mind. And Illinois should come out. Boy, would it be nice if they return the favor with a blowout of their own. I'm not expecting a blowout, but I am expecting Illinois to take care of business, because everything in this matchup points to that.
Honestly, though, like, I know I keep saying rosters don't matter, records don't matter, but this team is straight up not good. They don't rebound. They barely have any size besides Vanover, who plays 12 minutes a game at 7'5", which is crazy. But like, I'm pretty sure their starting big man is Noah Carter, who's like 6'6", unless there's somebody else off the bench that barely plays but starts.
You're right.
they don't rebound. Like Caleb Grill, one of their better transfers, is out for a couple weeks. Tamar Bates is one of their better players, the transfer from Indiana. Like he was just straight up not good for a couple years at Indiana. Uh, like Illinois' strength is size, athleticism, length. Like this is such a good matchup for Illinois in terms of like height, physicality, pretty much everything. Like there is just no excuse to lose this game. This is kind of a must-win game, just considering Brad Underwood's record. Like, like the past losses to Missouri have been so embarrassing, considering, you know, you're playing Mark Smith, Jeremiah Tillman, like these guys that decommitted, they transferred from Illinois, Javon Pickett. It's like it is so embarrassing as an Illinois fan. It just seems like Missouri gets up for this game more than Illinois has in the Brad Underwood era, at least, and that just cannot happen. Like Coleman Hawkins, he's 1-2 in this game. Terrence Shannon Jr. lost last year. Luke Goody's 1-1 in this game. Like a loss just cannot happen. A win is so needed for this team, even if it's not a crazy resume building win.
Yeah, no, just withstand the fact that this is a rivalry that Missouri's probably going to be up for, and impose your will and show up and don't be asleep in the first half like last year and get blown out of this game. That would be too much to Illinois' benefit. But yeah, you mentioned that. What was that, 2 years ago, where Mark Smith was on Missouri and they beat Io and Kofi, and he's posting like Instagram stories from the locker room, like talking crap to Illinois, and he had like 0 points or like 2 points.
He's terrible.
In the game.
Yeah, it was so embarrassing.
He did nothing, but like at the end of the day, like, all right, I mean, yeah, he won, he beat you, even though he's on a much worse basketball team. So take that personal and take it out on this Missouri team. I'm sick and tired of watching these bragging rights games and getting beat by teams that you shouldn't get beat by. And this is another situation. I think matchup wise, last thing I'll touch on, if Missouri was to beat you or was to stay in this game or have success in this game, I think the one thing you can point to is the fact that they turn teams over quite a bit. That's what they did last year. I think they were top 10 in the country at turning teams over defensively. This year so far, they're 45th in turnover percentage defense in the country so far this year. And they do pull out that three-quarter court pressure quite a bit. And that's one that Illinois will have to withstand without a point guard. We'll keep saying that all season. I think they've done a solid job for the most part. Couple struggles against Rutgers, couple struggles against Tennessee when they pressured in the backcourt. But I think they've done a pretty solid job, but you never know. I mean, that's probably Missouri's best chance in this game, is they're going to be aggressive from the jump, pressuring Illinois in the backcourt, trying to slow down possessions and trying to turn them over and get easy fast break points and just try to stay in the game that way. So Illinois' got to protect the ball in this game. They got to find the ball handlers they trust. Thought Ty Rodgers had his best game as a ball handler against Colgate, and now he's going to face a matchup where he's probably going to get tested and pressured a little bit. And so let's see how he handles that. And obviously you got to have your veterans step up and take care of the ball and not turn it over, whether that's Coleman, Terrence, Marcus, Quincy, all those guys. So that's the one thing to look out for. Missouri's probably going to press and try to turn you over in the backcourt a little bit. And if Illinois can withstand that, then I think it should be an easy night for them on paper, at least. Again, never know in this game, but that's the one area where maybe you have a little bit of concern. Like, okay, in a world where Missouri makes this a close game and is in danger of beating you, it's probably because you turned it over 23 times and just really struggled against their pressure. But I think Illinois should be able to handle that. And if they handle that, like you get into a half-court game, Illinois should own this team and should own the glass and should own the paint. And Missouri's going to try to jack up some threes and try to get hot and stay in the game. But Illinois defensively, I trust them a lot. Brad Underwood is going to have this team trying to run those shooters off the line and not help off of drivers and off of shooters onto drivers and give up open shots. And if you force Missouri into the paint and into shooting tougher twos and mid-range shots, Illinois wins this game easily. That's the MO for Illinois. So, I just win this game. Don't put no doubt in this one. Don't let this one be another classic Missouri gets up for it and you don't. I don't think that will be the case. I think this team is one that's built differently in terms of, being ready to go, and just, you should win this game and they will. But yeah, It's just that thought in the back of your mind every time this Illinois team plays Missouri. Like, oh boy, there's that thought in the back of your mind. Like, oh God, this is a much worse Missouri team, but maybe it won't show. But let's just take care of this team. How about?
I think so. I hope we will. I mean, the past couple of years, it's not like Missouri's been a bottom 100 team in the nation.
No.
Like, they've been solid teams overall, but still, if you look at the talent level Illinois has had the past couple of years in terms of like incoming transfers, incoming high school, like 4-star recruits compared to Missouri, it's night and day, honestly, even though they've had a couple decent NCAA tournament teams. But this year, it's a different story. Like, it just, a loss, a loss would, I mean, in past years, like, I haven't really been prepared for a loss to Missouri because Illinois teams have looked decent coming into this game. But then there's stretches like this game and like early Big Ten where in the past couple of years we've struggled like after this game. But I mean, this honestly is a really big test. You're on a neutral court. It's a big rivalry game. Decent team you're playing after like not too much basketball in the past couple of weeks. But in the end, I think we get up for it. I think Brad Underwood gets a one more win versus Missouri in his record books. And hopefully we continue this streak into next year and the next couple of years.
Want to give an official score prediction for this one just while we're at it, since we've been doing that all year?
Yeah, I'll say I honestly think we win by 10 plus. I remember a couple of years back I said we'd beat Missouri by like 30 and then we lost. But I'll say 73 to like 59. I think we shut them down defensively.
Yeah, I'm on the same page, and I hope that this isn't a freezing cold take again like a couple years ago, but I'm kind of going to take the strategy that you had, and it backfired. I think that was 3 years ago, that the 2020-21 team where you just thought, it was, okay, this team is going to blow Missouri out, and they somehow lost, and Iowa had like 36, and they still lost.
Yeah.
But I hopefully this doesn't come back to bite me, but I think Illinois avenges last year in similar fashion. Maybe not quite that big of a beatdown because that was a joke last year, but I think they dominate Missouri. I think they're way better. The matchup speaks to Illinois being just dominating the paint, dominating the glass. If they can not turn it over and not succumb to Missouri's pressure and maybe get transition opportunities by beating the pressure and getting the ball in Terrence's hands when Missouri's not set on defense, like all of a sudden it could get ugly. I think Illinois wins by 20 plus here in this one. Illinois 78, Missouri 56. Illinois blowout, avenges last year, dominates this Missouri team, and nothing can go wrong with me saying that, right? That's not gonna come back to bite me at all, right? Or bite you no. at all. That's
I'd love to see that though. Like a couple years back, we won by, I don't know how much we won by, but like at the end of the game, you saw Goody, Pods, Melendez getting the game, the freshman. That was awesome to see. I hope we see like Hansberry and Gibbs Lawhorn by the end of the game. That would just be awesome for the team, for the program, for the fans. I think there's honestly a decent shot at that happening.
Yeah, 2 years ago, the Big Ten title team with Trent and Kofi and Plummer, 88-63, Illinois beat them by 25. Yeah. So, would love a repeat of that type of effort by this Illinois team. But that should just about wrap us up here on this episode of the Champagne on Ice podcast. Make sure to go follow our Twitter account at Champagne on Ice. Drop all the episodes on there. Tweet a lot during games. Probably Friday night there'll be some tweets being fired off there, whether good or bad, depending on how this Illinois team shows up. So if you don't want to miss those, go drop a follow at Champagne on Ice on X/Twitter. And of course, subscribe to the Field of 68 Podcast Network YouTube channel for all of our episodes and also the other team pods on the network as well. And anything else you got?
Happy holidays, everybody.
Yeah, happy holidays. We won't be back here until after Christmas, so Merry Christmas to everybody. Have a great holiday season, and probably around the same time, Tuesday or Wednesday next week after Christmas, we will be back, recap Missouri, and lead into the start of Big Ten play because they got Fairleigh Dickinson in a week, and then it's Big Ten basketball starting after New Year's. So we'll be back to talk about that. But until then, Merry Christmas. Have a great week, everybody, and we'll see you next time on the Champagne